The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical psychology for today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, narrated by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. On this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from The Natives Are Restless by Idries Shah. 1. See what I mean? Character. A character is only an entire character when its elements disagree, when it contradicts its expected behavior. That is the essence of success of the English. A character always in character is no character at all. Han Su-yin, The Four Faces. I had been away from England for some months, and much of its image seemed to have faded, even to the extent that I was wondering whether some of my experiences there had really happened. The little grey man in the crumpled suit sitting next to me in the aircraft soon put an end to all that. If the River Thames, he was saying as the jumbo circled London, hadn't been there, they could have made London much bigger. But, I said, I thought that London only came into being because of the river. Capital cities do, centre of trade and transport routes, defensive line, and so on. He looked at me blankly, or rather with that English look which I knew so well, and which meant that I hadn't a chance. But I don't give up so easily. I tried again. Berlin on the Spree, Paris on the Seine, Cairo on the Nile, you know the idea. Oh, that old thing. He used the dismissive phrase which marked him as an academic, and laughed, giving the short bark of scholarly insouciance. I automatically read the clues, knew what was coming now, and mimed the words of the next two sentences as he spoke them. Is that old theory still about? Disposed of it myself years ago. Paper before the Geopsychological Society back in '53. Luckily my confusion was covered by the bump of our landing. The professor was impressed by the pilot's skill, and thought that the other passengers' applause arose from a similar cause. He had missed the irony, having only boarded the airliner at Frankfurt. All the way from Southeast Asia we had had terrible moments whenever the kite took off or landed, shudderings, bumps, grinding noises. The economy class passengers had even been issued with free glasses of Nigerian Riesling, and our morale had not been raised by the pilot's voice from the public address system. This is your captain speaking. We shall be taking off momentarily, and the next point we hit will be the coast of... English is a tricky language if you don't keep your wits about you. Still, we were now in good old England once again. The professor took my hand in his clammy one and pressed a card on me. It read, Professor Emeritus Xylophone Jabberish, M.A., Ph.D., F.I.G.S., Founder President, International Geopsychological Society, London. I soon found that I was neither geographically nor psychologically prepared for England. Too much had taken place in my life since I last saw it. A man in overalls caught my arm and said, first in English and then in Urdu, Get moving, don't block the gangway. That was more like it. Recognition of my existence by the terrestrial element. I made my way, pushed by eager tourists, marching stolidly behind the skein of travellers, eventually to arrive at a desk. Everyone was standing docilely in line. They did not relish my placing myself at the head of the queue, a habit I'd picked up abroad where devil take the hindmost is more current, and I made my way to more congenial company at the back, amid cries of, Cheek! And, I don't know what things are coming to, do you? Invariably addressed by someone to someone else who did not know what things were coming to either. I was wearing a large pair of aviator-style dark glasses and a wide-brimmed hat as I shuffled up to the official and offered my passport. He immediately asked me to remove them. Before I'd done that, he handed the passport back. I waited to be dismissed. He looked at me and said, Don't hold everybody up, sir. They haven't got all day, you know. Consulting my watch, I noted that it was nearly midnight, and so I answered cheerily that nobody at all, himself included, had much of the day left anyway. I was sensitive enough to see that, for some reason, did not please him either. There had been no car on the tarmac to whisk me through, bypassing customs and immigration, but of course there hadn't been any visible tarmac. Now there was nobody to collect my bags from the carousel. I had been spoilt by the cosseting which I'd got used to on a world tour. I picked up the cases myself to carry them past the customs people. Then one of them stopped me. "SB having you then?" "Having me? Oh, yes, English for I'll deal with you now." I said, "Nothing to declare, officer." "Then why are you going through the red channel?" "I didn't even know that I was in a channel. How do I get into some other one?" "You step over there and go through the green channel." "How do you do that, actually? And how do you mean channel? It looks just like the way out, like nothing at all, just space." He looked at me wearily. "I wouldn't try to be a comedian, sir." "I'm not going to. I'm a writer, you see." His colleague was more helpful, if less perceptive. "Let him go, Bert. He don't understand a word of English, that's all." "Thank you," I said, "and I shall commend you to your superior." His only answer was directed towards his colleague. "See what I mean, Bert?" I passed through an open door and found myself in a larger hall teeming with people. Again, there was nobody to take charge of me, no camera flashlights or gleaming teeth, not a single garlic breath. Only a sense of anticlimax, almost of loss. Then suddenly I was through, and in vociferous demand, as several men, each claiming to be a special cheap taxi service, each looking less like a taximan than the last, descended upon me. My mind went blank as I tottered to a seat by the wall, followed by the taximen. I saw pictures, remembered the time when one of my relatives had stumbled off the aircraft into this very hall not so very long ago. I had been there to meet him, but he was still bemused by his nonchalant reception. He had just arrived, those were happier times, from Kabul via Moscow by Aeroflot. I had sat with him near this very spot to allow him to get his breath. After a few minutes, his eyes had come into focus, and then I saw that they had a faraway look. "Dear Idris," he said, shaking his head slowly from side to side, "you should not believe what they say about the Russians. They are definitely improving." "How can your eminence say such a thing?" I asked, incredulity overcoming my natural restraint. "By the evidence of my own eyes. Do you know, when people arrive at Moscow airport, they are met by the chief of protocol? There is a red carpet, an inspection of a guard of honor, a brass band. I know, for that is what happened to me." Even then, I had known which I preferred, the Muscovite show or the English insouciance. I stood up and shook off the pirate drivers, shouting, "I have no money, and I am a heavily armed international terrorist." They melted away with gratifying dispatch. My ears went back into action automatically, and I heard the two English women to my left chatting. "I really felt bad, dear, when I heard him over the announcement system. It was a Spanish pilot, could tell that by his voice. I thought, dear me, I hope he doesn't crash the plane, know what I mean?" A louder voice, this time from the right, jerked my head around. A Spanish woman was talking to her husband in the rapid-fire manner of Madrid. "Of course I was afraid, Querido. It was my first flight, but as soon as I heard the Spanish voice of the pilot from the loudspeaker, I knew that our brave boy would bring us safely through all perils." Someone was having me paged. Obeying the announcement, I went to the telephone. It was my personal assistant, S.K. Delavi, who had gone on ahead. "Thank goodness you are all right. Everyone seems to be crazy here." "You're probably the crazy one, Delavi. Why didn't you meet me? I've been fighting off the weirdest taxi drivers." "That's exactly what I mean. Taxi drivers. I'm still in London and it's the rush hour. I couldn't get one to take me to Heathrow. The radio cab dispatcher says they're all there already. Wouldn't be surprised. But you must have been able to find one. You just hail them off the street. That was the crazy one. What did he say? He thought you were several people. How could he? He'd never seen me. He seemed all right at first. Then he said, "Who are you going to meet at the airport?" I gave him your identity. A Qurayshite, a Sharif of the noblest lineage, and a son of Sirdar Ali Shah, and a grandson of the great Nawab of Sadhana, and a scion of the Jan Fishan Khan, Lord of Pagman. And then what? Cut it short, Alavi. Then he told me to get out of the cab, saying, "I'm only licensed to carry 4, and that's 6 of you already." How long have you been in England, Alavi? Only a week. I'm surprised you've survived that long. In the East, if not anywhere else, one can't answer one's employer back, though poetic quotations are permitted. Sultan Khan Dalavi contented himself with, "In the shop of the sightless jeweller, the shell, the stone, and ruby are as one." Somehow I got to London by tube train. I just made the station safely. I had had a narrow escape when a truck came roaring out of a tunnel as I was trying to understand the words on a huge sign which said, "Caution, frequent vehicular emergence." Although the weather was fine and sunny, I knew I was back in England by the conversation of my neighbours on the train. An eager, well-dressed American opposite wonderingly remarked to his wife that English people did not seem to give their national anthem the respect that a patriotic hymn surely deserved. Beside me was a man in a tweed suit and scuffed shoes, who identified himself as a Cambridge academic. "I could not help overhearing you, sir," he said, "and can perhaps offer a solution to your problem." The American seemed a little surprised. "My problem? Oh, well, okay, shoot." "You see," said the Englishman, "the tune to which the words of God Save the Queen are sung is the last but one survivor of the identical anthems formerly used by most of the German principalities. 1793, Imperial Germany, 1811, Switzerland, 1850, Liechtenstein. It was brought over here from there, and Liechtenstein still uses it. I fancy you also got 'My country, 'tis of thee' from a similar source. Hardly English, you see?" The American fell silent. In his place, I would have done the same. Not being in his place, I asked the scholar to continue my education in Englishry. "Is there more about the national anthem?" I asked. "Matter of fact, there is," he answered, "and a great deal is revealed by textual, musicological, and historical study." Such as? Such as, though the tune as we know it is credited to John Bull, organist at Antwerp, it may have been by Henry Casey, author of Sally in Our Alley. What was John Bull, the archetypical Englishman, doing in Antwerp? I couldn't help wondering. But I wanted to clarify exactly why people might not stand up from respect when the anthem was played. I suppose the younger generation spurn it from iconoclasm, rather than because of its connection with Antwerp or the hymns of defunct German principalities, I said. "Well, it's got a longer history than that, this attitude," he told me. "You see, the opening words are said to have been suggested by the Catholic hymn Domine Salvum, which meant that many Protestants felt it was unsuitable for Anglicans." "I see," I said. "It was thought subversive." But I was running ahead too fast. "Not entirely," he said, "because of the words, 'Confound their politics, frustrate their knavish tricks.'" "Yes," I said, "some people have said that this couplet is too hostile to foreigners." "I wasn't finished," he said, looking at me over his horn rims. "Sorry." "No, that's all right. As I was saying, the bits about politics and knavery are thought to have been put in after the gunpowder plot. They are anti-Catholic, not really anti-foreign. Fawkes was English, after all." Has anyone ever made a public denunciation of the national anthem? He gave me a severe look. Perhaps you do not recall the Dean of Worcester's informing the Times that he would not allow the second verse to be sung. It was, and I think I have his exact words, unchristian, indecent, disgraceful anywhere, in a church blasphemous, and in a cathedral a brawling obscenity. The American had leant over me towards the English Don, listening intently, a bemused look on his face. Now the man of learning extended his neck towards him. You, sir, would you like chapter and verse on that? The American took a deep breath. I'd rather have a McDonald's with ketchup on it, he said. I buried my face in a newspaper, the Daily Mail. 1.5 million copies circulation. An article by Andrew Alexander. I am not sure that the average Briton wants or should want to be as prosperous as the average American, with all that involves in terms of dedication to work and career. And there is a great deal in the American way of life which no sensible person would want to import. Quite so. Well, I thought, if the national anthem really meant nothing and people from most other countries would find this hard to credit, there must be something that did. I would keep my eyes and ears open. One of the best places to find out how the English think is a London club. I have never spent more than an hour or so in mine without hearing, in the drawing room or around a dining table, something new, interesting, or relevant to the topics of the day. The afternoon of my arrival back, I was treating my jet lag with a cup of coffee when I became aware of a conversation between some other members settled in the circle of armchairs around me. One of them was showing the others a photograph which he had taken in Egypt at the time of the Suez episode, which is English for a war. It showed a graffito on a ruined wall. "Pale hounds return to thine abodes." Some Egyptian patriot, weak in English demotic but evidently the owner of a dictionary, had been doing his stuff. "Of course," said the retired general. "In my time it was go home dirty British, you know." "Well," said the ex-governor to my amazement, "there's nothing wrong about that." As I pricked up my ears, he sauntered to the library and returned with a large book, for which the other members, accustomed to this sort of thing, had been patiently waiting. The governor announced, 2,000 Years of London by C. Whittaker Wilson, London 1933. I read to you from page 61. Soap did not come into general use in England until as late as 1824. The point is interesting as an example of a common and indispensable commodity being of comparatively recent development. There was a general murmur of approval at this information. "Must say that my time in the colonies was a little after 1824, was all the general felt like adding. Ha, ha, ha. So I learnt cleanliness had been next to godliness for only a century and a half, almost as recently as the adoption of the Union flag. That explained, perhaps, the old saying I had seen in Tilly's Dictionary of the Proverbs in England, "Wash your hands often, your feet seldom, and your head never." The small group of members had moved off to the bar, leaving the book on the table. I picked it up, wondering idly whether further study would show that, say, football was a deprecated sport in this supposedly football-crazy country. As if in answer, the book fell open at page 98, which records that football was actually made illegal in England by Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and Edward II. That night I had nightmares about being soapless for 1,000 years. Of course, if I'd kept up my reading, I would have known since 1962 what Nancy Mitford had said in The Water Beetle, "True cleanliness is considered rather immoral by my compatriots." Except that 2 decades later, the English changed again. In mid-1985 it was revealed in a research report that, although no more than 15% of the inhabitants of the island bathe daily, the average person takes 4.5 baths or showers every week. And this document comes hard on the heels of another one, which tells how the 20 million households in the United Kingdom boil 1,825 million unnecessary gallons of water a year as a byproduct of tea making. So there is no bias against heating and using water as such. It is more likely that there is a resistance to Indian ways. Dr. Chi G. P. Spear in The Nabobs, a learned monograph on the English in 18th century India, has traced the custom of having baths to the Indian method of ablution, which had struck most observers in the 18th century. This English bathing business, Dr. Spear observes, is quite modern. The Englishman, too, says our learned Cambridge man, used to consider whisky no gentleman's drink until his compatriots in India, taste influenced by the fiery native arak, took to it. This audio is made available by the Idries Shah Foundation and is copyright 2019. All rights reserved.